and Made of Silk and Steel, Chapter 7. Oh, you're a dead man. This thought seemed to occur to Salinger immediately after the admission left his mouth. Keep her away from me, he panted wildly, looking toward Luke, the hand not bound to a sling fumbling around for his phone. An inelegant shriek escaped him as Jessica pushed him against the low brick retaining wall that separated the churchyard from the city sidewalk. He shrieked as Jess shoved at his wounded shoulder hard, and Luke realized that people were starting to stare at them, starting to take out their phones too, though Salinger had yet to fully grab a hold of his own. The more he panicked, the louder he got, and the more people on the street began to take notice. Salinger blubbered as Jess pulled at his healing shoulder. I'm going to turn you into mincemeat, she hissed, little man. Jess, Luke said urgently, as he took in the curious, nervous, and worried glances of the New Yorkers around them. That's enough. Not until I smear him across the pavement. Alarmed, Luke hooked an arm around Jessica's waist and dragged her off the weirdo serial killer before she tried to carry out that threat, glancing to the side to see the man's face relax into smug relief. Don't think I'm doing this for you, he snarled, grunting as Jess made an attempt to lunge forward again. Salinger gaped at them dumbly for a moment before Luke, frustrated and pissed off, barked, "Run away, you useless sack of shit! What do you want? Do you want her to kill you?" Jessica swore and spat at him, and it was all he could do to hold on through her thrashing and squirming. I know, but when we find Peter again, he's going to need his mother with him, not in prison. He lost him, she howled furiously. I lost him again. Then, so quietly, he barely heard him after her shrieking. What's happened to my baby? I don't know, Jess, Luke said heavily, patting her leather-covered shoulder, but you've got a smart kid, you and Murdoch. I gotta think that if he hasn't just come back home, he's got a really good reason for it. Jessica? A quiet female voice asked. One of the nuns stood at the doorway to Clinton Church, her face lined with age and worry. Was that you screaming, Jessica? She lifted her head. It was, she said, shocking Luke with her attempt at politeness. I'm sorry, Sister Maggie. I seem to have misplaced your grandson. Luke gaped as he realized what that implied. The nun was Murdoch's mother? Jesus, every time he learned more about Matt, the more the disaster that was his adult life made sense. Quietly, Sister Maggie scoffed. Seems to me that Peter has two parents, Jessica, not just one, and I doubt Matthew would place the blame only on you. Her eyes swept over her first, then Luke. Come inside, Jessica. My son sugarcoats things. He doesn't like me to be too well informed. You can come inside and tell me how this happened. Jess sighed quietly, a look of discomfort coming over her face before following her into the church. If she were anyone else, I'd blow her off, she muttered glumly. Murdoch doesn't exactly sing her praises, but she's still his mom, and I'm not being an asshole to her for no reason. Luke shrugged. I'm your backup for whatever. Ordinarily, that would have garnered us at least a small smile from her, but today it got him a silently grateful glance. You probably won't have to hold me back this time, but try to nudge me if I start saying fuck in front of the nun. Will do. Jesus Christ, Murdoch, Jessica muttered, throwing her jacket carelessly onto the nearby desk and collapsing on the couch beside him. I thought I looked like shit. Matt looked up from the tablet, quickly pausing the reading his tablet was giving him, his bloodshot eyes glaring a neon sign that proclaimed the same grief and exhaustion that she was feeling. Foggy had been half asleep at his own desk while clicking through an internet archive of new articles from Wappering Falls, New York, one that discussed a tragic accident which had killed Salinger's brother and placed Salinger himself at the scene of the crime. His blood felt like it was made of caffeine and anxiety. Colleen and Danny were half alive and mostly asleep on the pull-out couch they kept in the office specifically for situations like these. Jet-lagged and more than able to sleep through the noise of Jess stomping around, Karen, Trish, and Eric entered the room almost immediately after Jessica sat down, and Matt was distracted for a moment by their loudly pounding hearts before he sat up straight, his muscles protesting the movement with cruel objections. "Let me guess," Matt sighed. "He's made additional demands before letting Peter go? Did we at least get proof of life?" He couldn't smell any more of Peter around her than he normally would, but on this occasion Matt was more than prepared to be wrong. His stomach sank as Jessica let out an ugly laugh. "Oh no, it's much worse than that," she snarled, and his chest tightened up even more painful than his pulled muscles. "He could be anywhere right now. Peter ran away. Salinger doesn't have him, Murdoch." His ears felt like they were filled with water. "What?" Around him, Foggy began repeating the word at a much louder volume and with much more colorful language attached. Trish was dead silent for about 10 seconds before she began crying more quietly than most people but Matt could hear. Colleen was now awake enough to earnestly ask, "How do we know that he isn't just lying to you?" And around all that noise and sound, Matt could hear one very distinctively: laughter. Practically smushed against the entryway all by herself, Karen let out a series of quiet chuckles, hysterical and filled with relief. Matt's head whipped around to look at her, red lenses pointing straight toward her. "Karen," he said slowly, "is there something you'd like to share with us?" Immediately, Karen sobered up. Behind Matt, she could see Jessica staring at her as well, alerted by his sudden motion, her hazel eyes peeling apart layers from Karen's skin. She didn't see any point in pretending that she didn't know what he was asking. She solemnly said, "I'm not sorry, and nothing you say will make me regret it." "Where is he?" Matt demanded, teeth bared, anger rousing to full strength, another despite his sheer exhaustion. "I don't know," Karen said, calm even in the face of her friend's anger. "I don't know where he is, and he won't be coming back until we're sure that Salinger has been taken care of." Danny's head had turned back and forth from Matt to Karen like he was watching a tennis match. "What's going on? Why does Jess think Pete's missing if Karen has him?" "Karen doesn't have Peter," Foggy realized, eyes blinking wider. "She's had the Punisher take him into hiding." Expression hardened, Jess said, "And I told you that I vetoed that plan, Paige." "How do you know that Castle took him and my kid isn't just wandering around the city by himself?" Wordlessly, Karen held up an object in her hand, and they all stared at it. For Matt's benefit, she shook it slightly and weakly joked, "It's a boy." She folded her hands back together, head bowed through, though her voice still came out strongly. "And I heard you when you said no. But then circumstances changed, and what's done is done, Jessica. I can't lift cars or sense lies like some of you can, so I did the only thing I could to keep him safe, and I won't apologize for that." Confused, Trish wondered, who can sense lies? Matt tensed, but Karen breezily waved her hand dismissively. "Figure of speech. Anyway, Peter will be ready to come back whenever Salinger has been dealt with. I can't tell you where he is. I only know that he's as safe as I could possibly make him." "Well," Danny said, in his usual overeager manner, giving Matt's shoulder a companionable squeeze, "if we want to get Pete back home, it's all up to us, isn't it? Let's figure out how we get Salinger out of the way." At his desk, Foggy smiled grimly. Oh, I think I know how we'll accomplish that. In the back seat of a completely different truck rolling through Montana this time, Peter curled up with Max and slept, and while he slept, he dreamed. On the warm leather interior, Peter felt the cold shock of the November air slapping against his face. Around him, the nightscape of New York City was as familiar as his fingers and toes, even though in his dream he didn't seem to have any fingers and toes, no face either. Come to think of it, despite the vivid sensation of brisk wind and the familiar smell of wet garbage and asphalt and millions of bodies all living on top of each other. What Peter did seem to have was a view of the dark city rooftops, speeding through the night, the moon becoming his only light source as his mind went wherever his subconscious took him. Or he thought his subconscious was taking him, until Peter realized that he was experiencing everything around him in too much detail. The noise of the traffic was muffled. Writing on billboards was blurry and indistinctive. But Peter could see each individual car and headlight. As if he rushed between buildings and down alleyways. Individual lights in apartment windows and in the scenes inside were detailed and crystal clear, but he heard no televisions or radios. No conversations of the people walking down the street. He had no idea what he was doing or why he was there, but all of those questions left Peter's mind as he set his insubstantial eyes upon the figure of a man with ropes wrapped around his fists and moonlight shining off the horns on his head. Daredevil. As though sensing his excitement, that one thought seemed to summon Peter to Daredevil's side, until he was practically perched just behind him, like though he didn't yet realize it, an angel upon the devil's shoulder. Peter had to hold his proverbial breath as multiple men armed with knives or guns all came after Daredevil at once. Below the flat red eyes of the mask, Peter could see the man beneath it bare his teeth coated in a layer of even redder blood. Unable to hear his voice, Peter could tell the words coming out of his mouth weren't nice ones. He spat each of them out along with a thick layer of blood, canine, sharp in moonlight like the teeth of a wild animal. As it turned out, it didn't matter how many guns or knives the other men had on them. It didn't even seem to matter how many times they hit him. In the end, Daredevil was still the only one standing, blood now openly dripping from his mouth, soundless breath, heaving out clouds of white air in the cold. Just as quickly as Peter's perspective had brought him to Daredevil's side, it shifted again when his horned head turned, attention shifted from the bodies rolling around the snow-dusted rooftops. Abruptly, this forced Peter to zero in on whatever it was that caught his attention, and Peter's stomach clenched uncomfortably as he realized what Daredevil was now looking at. The strange effect of this perspective was that he could see her much more clearly and closely from the distance between her on the ground and Daredevil on the roof than he would normally be able to. Mom. Again, as though in answer to that one desperate plea, it was as though Jess was staring directly at him as she stared up at Daredevil. Her expression as clear and distinct as a photograph, as her face twisted and she snarled out something filled with venom and anger. Damp black strands of hair twisted and sticking on her cheeks, eyes blazing in the moonlight. Peter felt his whole stomach climb into his throat as Daredevil bolted forward and they dropped free, falling down into the black night onto a balcony, down and down and down, lunging toward her, moving like a predator about to strike until he and Peter were bursting from mid-air to the ground below. Toward her, retreating back. Mom! Peter cried, gasping himself awake, shuddering as he realized that he failed to warn her, failed to stop Daredevil from attacking her, grabbing her. He still wasn't sure what sort of confrontation they were about to have. "All right back there, kid?" Mr. Castle asked from the driver's seat with a quick glance over his shoulder. We have to go back to New York," Peter said, chest still moving fast with breathless panic. "That's the last thing we're gonna do," he said flatly. "We have to," Peter insisted, sitting up quickly. His hands were trembling as he lifted them to rub at his tired eyes, his aching temples. "I just saw Daredevil attacking my mom." You mean you had a nightmare?" Mr. Castle said skeptically. "Kid, I know that you miss your mom, but we are not going back across the country because you had a nightmare." "No," he said fiercely, gripping the back of the seat in front of him. "This was not a nightmare. I saw Daredevil beat up a whole bunch of guys on a roof, and then he jumped down a balcony after my mom yelled at him." Mr. Castle was quiet for a long minute, and then he sighed loudly. "You sure did the short stick, didn't you, kid?" he muttered, fingers drumming on the steering wheel. "But I still can't go back to New York just because your mom picked a fight, Pete. And I promise you Jessica can damn well take care of herself. You already know that she's faced a lot worse than the man in black." "I know that," Peter thought miserably, "but I don't want him to get hurt either." His mother didn't like people with powers, and it was fairly common knowledge that Daredevil had some kind of power, though no one was confident about exactly what that power was. The usual theory was that he was some kind of mind reader or had sort of precognitive ability. Part of Peter's desire to meet him one day was the ability to ask someone like Daredevil what having those powers was like. He'd asked Luke a little bit until he realized that all of Luke's powers were physical. His endurance, his incredible strength, his invulnerability were all strictly physical characteristics. Peter understood his physical powers: squeeze two hand, break things, learn to be gentler, lather, rinse, repeat. Peter's contemplation of this hopeless situation was rather rudely interrupted by somebody shooting out their front tires. Of course, Peter didn't know that just then. He didn't even know it when Frank swore and the car screeched across the highway and rolled sideways and rolled again on his ruined tires until it lay on its side in the middle of the road like a dead animal. Frank was motionless in front of the truck, draped over the center console and bleeding from the hairline. Still, Peter did not realize how badly this had all gone wrong until the back door of the cab was ripped off its hinges and thrown completely clear from the car. By now his head was killing him, but he couldn't be sure if it was the lingering effects of the dream, a bump on the head from the car accident, or the man with the silver arm. On balance, he thought, frozen with terror, as the metal arm reached inside and yanked his seatbelt free. Maybe he'd better worry about the last one most of all. Peter screeched, instinctively panicking the moment the man tried to touch him. It didn't hurt as much when Salinger had touched him, or maybe Peter just knew what to expect now. Only later will he be embarrassed that he screamed for his mother, and this time he knew exactly which one he was asking for. He wanted Jess in her scuffed boots and worn leather jacket and ripped jeans, Jess who even at this very moment might be squaring off against Daredevil. "Mom!" he screamed, some instinct knowing that he absolutely could not let this man take him away. He wouldn't be running away from this man. "Mom!" He jostled the man's goggles aside with his struggling, even kicking him in the ribs until he heard one of those horrible crunches. But even then, to Peter's horror, the metal-armed terror still wouldn't let him go. Then there was a nightmarish nails on a chalkboard crackling noise, and the metal-armed man roared out a furious scream of pain as a black stick with a bright blue light zapping out of the end, was pressed directly beneath his eye. Peter was dropped to the ground like a sack of potatoes, and Mr. Castle lunged out of the wreckage of the vehicle, kneeing the stranger in the crotch and slamming his head against the side of the car, once, twice, 3 times, until he wasn't moving, and Mr. Castle could limp around to face him. "Go," he said breathlessly, shoving Peter forward to begin walking across the scrubby landscape around them. "Go, I said." "What about you and Max?" he whimpered, lower lip wobbling as he tried not to break down crying. "Max broke his front leg when the car flipped," Mr. Castle said grimly. "We gotta leave him where he is until I can get us another car. In the meantime, we need to leave this place. Now, Peter!" "The man ain't dead, but he also ain't gonna wake up easy, and he'll have a hell of a headache when he does," he said dryly. "And when he does, he'll probably still be wanting you. And that's why we're leaving. Now go." End of chapter.